Hello and welcome to Mothman's Bookshop. My name is Nicole, and today I'd like to tell you about The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. Warning, I'll try and make this as spoiler-free as possible, but given its book review, there are bound to be a couple spoilers. And with that, let's get into it. The Memory Police is a Japanese book by Yoko Ogawa written in 1994, and apparently it's written in a similar style to Franz Kafka or George Orwell. While it doesn't quite fit into the standards or criteria, I guess, of Western genres, most would consider it a dystopia/science fiction novel. I can't really contribute to that conversation since I've never read Kafka, and while I've only really read 1984, I don't think I would willingly read any of Orwell's other books. This book is set on a secluded island in the middle of nowhere where things mysteriously disappear every so often, and its residents must dispose of these things if they haven't disappeared on their own already. For example, when roses disappeared, the wind selectively blew off all the rose petals in the garden right into the river below, while all the other flowers stayed intact, and those living on the island had to bring out any bouquets or pictures of roses they had and dispose of them. When these things disappear, any memories and feelings associated with them disappear as well. These disappearances are enforced by the Big Brother-esque Memory Police, though it's really unclear whether they remember things that have disappeared or are under the same effect as the other residents of the island. The twist? Some people on the island remember everything like you and me, and for that reason they're taken away by the Memory Police to be detained and potentially experimented on to find out what gives them this ability. One of these people is our protagonist's editor, R. We're not really given any other name except for R. Anyway, once she finds out, she gets the idea to hide him under her floorboard so he doesn't get taken away by the Memory Police. I searched up a summary so I could better explain what the book is about, and it made an interesting point. Instead of objects disappearing physically and then from memory, they disappear from memory first, and that's reflected on the physical world. Now for my review. I may be a bit biased since I generally don't really like dystopias and tend to stick to fantasy and magical realism, so this book was a little outside my comfort zone. Overall, I thought it was pretty interesting, and honestly, I couldn't put it down despite its dull writing. It had a few interesting points, which I'm starting to realize the more I look back on it. One of these points being its commentary on the power of art in provoking resistance and critical thought. In the words of Jack Edwards, a book YouTuber, art and artists and creativity are like the antithesis of authoritarianism and the police. I have very, very mixed feelings about this book. At first glance, it seems like a great commentary on censorship and the power of memories, but once you start reading it, you realize it's very dull. It feels like the whole book is building up to this crazy event that never comes, and there aren't that many interesting metaphors, other than the overarching message of the book, to really hold your attention at any given moment. The book is told from the perspective of our main character, who I'll just refer to as the MC, a novelist who is under the same effect as everyone else in the island, which gives an excuse for the lack of certain memories, or the effect of brain fog in writing, which is actually kind of cool. But given she's a writer, it doesn't excuse the lack of interesting comparisons or metaphors, something I really look for in a book. Okay, let's rewind for a minute, because I think I'm being a bit too harsh on the book. Hearing me talk about how dull I think it is, you may think I hated it, but I actually didn't. As I mentioned before, I have very conflicted feelings about this book, primarily because of the writing style. It is very dull, and it conveys that feeling of incompleteness and brain fog. One of my favorite quotes about this is, "I have to make do with a hollow heart full of holes. That's why I'm jealous of your heart, one that offers some resistance, that is transparent and yet not." For some context, this quote comes about when she's talking to her hidden editor who can remember things, about his feelings about his memories and what it's like to not lose things. Due to the fact that the writing style intentionally plays into that idea of incompleteness and memory loss, I'll cut it some slack, but it still doesn't make me too happy. Don't get me wrong, it's a cool effect and helps me connect to the story more, but I can't say that I was too enthralled by the story itself. There was one moment where I was actually really worried for the characters, and the suspense level was pretty high. Major spoiler warning, and don't say I didn't warn you. Now, this is one of my favorite scenes in the book because it actually gives us some action and reignited my interest in the book. Here's what happens. As we know from the summary, the main character's editor, R, is one of the people who remembers everything. Once the MC finds out, she hides him under her floorboard so that the police don't catch him. A few days after another thing disappears, R's birthday comes around, and the MC cooks all these foods and they have a little party in his tiny floorboard room. Around the end of the meal, the memory police start knocking on the house door, and the MC needs to quickly climb out of the room, cover it back up with the carpet, and get to the door before the police knock it down and find them. She opens up the door, and they go in to search the house, and as the police are searching, she's forced to stand at the door. And while she's standing there, she notices that the carpet covering the secret trapdoor is slightly turned up. She realizes that if the police notice it, they might look under, and that would mean the end for her, R, and her friend, another accomplice to this whole situation. This scene feels like that big finale we've been waiting for the whole book. The tension keeps rising as Ogawa writes about the MC looking back and forth between the roaming police and the upturned rug corner, the thoughts racing in her head about everything that could go wrong if they find R's hideout. It's a really tense moment and some of the best writing in the whole book in my opinion. Something I like in any book is when the story flips between another time or story within the story. This happened in The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, where the story went back and forth between the beginning of her journey and present day, and in Truly Devious, where the past is used a lot for both exposition and to help the mystery element. In The Memory Police, we are given excerpts from the novel the MC is working on throughout the book. Personally, I don't believe it's there for exposition or to really connect to the actual characters, but instead it deepens the reader's understanding of the importance of your personality and sense of self. For simplicity purposes, I'm calling this book within a book the Inception novel. In it, the main character, we'll call her Meg because she's unnamed like everyone else in the book, loses her voice and needs to use a typewriter to communicate. When the initial concept is explained, it's honestly a little bit ironic when compared to the end, which I'll explain in a second. Throughout the Inception novel, Meg describes herself falling in love with her typewriting instructor, who seems to never actually use a typewriter, only teach it, and how he helps her rediscover her voice through the typewriter. At some point, Meg's writer breaks, and she has no means of communicating, and her teacher/lover takes her to the clock tower workshop where there are hundreds of broken typewriters all piled on top of each other. She gets locked in there, and after a while her lover stops visiting and caring for her, and starts courting another student of his. As it turns out, Meg's voice was trapped inside of the typewriter. At the end of the Inception novel, Meg wastes away inside the room and eventually sort of fades away into the workshop itself, becoming the room, I guess. You have to read it to understand it properly. It's a bit hard to explain. This creates some interesting juxtaposition, since at the end of the actual book, the disappearances get more and more drastic, starting with everyone's left leg, and eventually leading to everything being forgotten except for their voices. The MC, or her voice since that's all that's left, floats down to R to say goodbye and disappear forever. Kind of ironic, since she spent the entire book writing a novel about a girl who has everything except for her voice. I consider both endings to be a bit absurd, but absurd in the best way possible, strangely enough. The entire book has led up to this moment, and while it's bittersweet, it's a very satisfying ending. Final thoughts? The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa is a wild ride from start to finish, except it's in a Toyota, and instead of going up and down, it's a winding road up a mountain where you get a Taco Bell Crunchwrap Supreme at the end. I really recommend it to anyone who's interested in dystopias or Japanese writing. Goodreads gave it a 3.8 out of 5, I give it a 3.5. This week's question comes from Foggy D, who asks, what was your favorite part and would you change anything about the story to make it better? My favorite part was definitely the searching scene, like I said before, because of all the tension and fear of discovery. I don't think I would change anything about the book because it has its own specific style and message, and I don't want to ruin it or change it. Thank you all so much for listening to the first episode of Mothman's Bookshop. I hope we continue this journey together. Once again, this is your host Nicole, and I'll see you next Saturday with a new recommendation here at Mothman's Bookshop.